So thank you, Dena, and thank you, Simon, for joining me for this webinar on doing evaluations remotely. So as we were talking before going online and just now, what we want to talk about is what's changing when it comes to doing evaluations because of COVID-19. So let's have a conversation that addresses how the virus and how this particular crisis is affecting the practice of evaluations and probably the theory of evaluations. But let's also think about what changes might remain after this crisis. What are we learning in the process of doing evaluations remotely that might actually make the evaluation practice better, and that might make sense to incorporate into our practice later on. So let me start with your with both of you. You can tell me something about what you're working on now, or what you've been working on in the last few months that is being affected by this crisis.
So I'm an independent consultant, so I'm working on several different projects. The one that we're working on together, Dena and I, is on Think Tank's Southern Hemisphere collaboration, where we're doing an evaluation for the International Development Research Centre in Canada. So that's the one we'll probably talk about most. But other work, so that's the only evaluation I've got ongoing, but there's two other projects which are helping programs to develop monitoring and evaluation systems. Both quite similar, both to do with research, and both requiring a shift also in terms of how we engage with people online in this time.
Okay. What about you, Dena?
Yes, I'm involved in 3 main evaluations at the moment. 2 of them with evaluating research organizations, so IDRC, and the other one is with APHRC. And then another one which is very different, which is about a youth network. So they've had quite interesting different challenges because of the target group or the kinds of respondents we've been trying to access. It's been quite interesting.
Okay, so let me start with a question about the practice of evaluation, before the crisis or before having to think about doing this 100% remotely. Is there anything about the practice of evaluation that requires face-to-face interaction?
That's a good question. It depends is always the answer, right? Of course, the sort of larger and the more complicated your evaluation is, the more vital it is to have face-to-face interaction. But I've done several short evaluations, maybe I wouldn't even call them evaluations, maybe like reviews, where I've done it completely at my desk without any travel, without any face-to-face. And they're generally 10, 15 days worth of work, so they're not big. But that kind of thing you can. I think where it becomes more complicated, where you have a team doing it, where it's really important to understand the context of what you're evaluating, that's when it becomes important to see people face to face, to go and visit those contexts, to actually experience and observe organizations that you're working with. And where it's an ongoing evaluation as well, where it's going to be several months, for example, it really helps to meet someone at the beginning face to face, your client, to be able to just understand how they work and get to know them on a personal level as well. That's really important for a good working relationship. But yeah, there's several things we can get into on that.
So that's exactly where I was going to start with, was building relationships. So for me, the real value of face-to-face interaction is building the relationship with the evaluation users. And it's our practice to have a face-to-face planning and design workshop for the evaluation. Yes, you can get away, we often get away with doing an evaluation in section meeting, kind of just a quick meeting remotely, but then we tend to bring the team together with the clients in a face-to-face session for a few days, like we did with the IDRC. We actually spent a week there interviews, back and forth with the evaluation stakeholder committee. And by the end of it, we had a good working relationship. We knew each other, and it built an essential trust that is needed for an evaluation. Because you really want them to, want to have a trusting relationship between you so they will also get the maximum use out of the findings and buy into the recommendations. So of course it's possible to do this virtually because you can build relationships, with video calls, but I think the quality is not necessarily the same. But I think, so with all the evaluations that we're working on at the moment, we started before lockdown. And the one, we didn't work with the people directly, but we worked with the organization before. So we had also already an element of trust in place. So that really helps. And I think for me, the other thing is, it's, when you're in field and you're doing field work, you're often spending a lot of time with the client or with the evaluation user, maybe driving between interviews or having a lunch where you can have informal engagement. And sometimes, just like conferences, that's often the most interesting or the instructive moments where you really can have some reflective conversation in between formal interviews. So I think that's what one misses.
Yeah, I was thinking about you get a sense of reading a room, of capturing some subtle reactions to a question, or that conversation after the interviews you were saying, right? Going back to the office and thinking, reflecting on what just happened. That is going to be very difficult to do online or remotely. But so from you, I get that the biggest challenge is building that trust that is necessary between the evaluator and the users of the evaluation. And I can certainly relate to that. Evaluations are hard often to sell within an organization and within a project. And so if you don't have that trust and the trust of the team, it's very hard to get the work done. But what other challenges have you faced? For instance, in this IDRC evaluation that we are working on together, where it started before the crisis with a work plan that assumed travel, assumed the world as it was before, and now it has to do things very differently. What are the challenges you're facing in that particular project or other projects you're involved in?
Yeah, I have so for me, it's because we're at this stage of we did the inception report at the end of last year. We've been working on detailed design the first few months of the year. We're now getting into implementation. We haven't yet jumped into the sort of field work and data collection. So we're in that kind of intervening stage of, it was actually a good opportunity to recognize that we needed to shuffle things around, redesign components. So that's the stage we've been at. And trying to do that in this current context has been a challenge. And of course, there are challenges in terms of taking everything online, and I think we'll get to that in just a minute. But for me, the biggest challenge has just been the fact that everyone we're trying to work with is also struggling with the current context. So whether that's they're unwell and not working, or they're having to care for people, childcare, for example, has been a big factor in the current context. People are just distracted, they're concerned, there's just stress, and so just productivity is going down. Maybe the demands on their work are increasing. So it's just harder to reach people and engage them and work with them in the way that you want to and should be able to. But also people, especially some of the people in IDRC that we're trying to work with, they're having to reshift their own programs that they're working on. They're sort of, I guess, balancing resources to try and get their programs to respond to the COVID-19 crisis in the countries they're working in the programs they're working in. So they're having to do a lot of redesign themselves. So this overall, it just means that every time we're trying to reach people, we just have to take into account that it's going to take longer, and we have to find different ways and make sure we're really clear on what we're asking people because they have less time. So that's at this current stage, that's been the biggest challenge for us.
And what do you think?
Yeah, I think it takes longer to make decisions, for example. You have to put a lot more prep work into developing concept notes and sharing your ideas, as you know, getting buy-in. It's not so easy just to convene a meeting and get together. So we are, for example, designing the case studies at the moment, and instead of people have zoomed out, I'm tired of Zoom meetings. So we've developed a concept note for the case studies. We're then going to be filming ourselves, presenting the concept note, sending it out to people. So getting people's attention is harder as well. So hopefully they will engage with the video of us speaking about the concept note, short videos, and then they can make a decision. So we've had to be creative of how we engage the evaluation users. I think for me, not so much in the IDRC challenge evaluation, because so far we haven't done a lot of field work, but certainly in the APA Trust C one and in the youth evaluation for DG Murray Trust Activate, there's a digital divide, and you can only reach people so far, certain levels of people so far, and not, there's no digital equality in the world. So some people have moved back to the rural areas where the connectivity is bad. We're doing this evaluation throughout in East Africa. Some people, data costs are very expensive. So even if you're calling them on WhatsApp to do an interview, then the batteries run out, or the data runs out, and you have to reschedule. And in the real world, we usually pay people a stipend for coming to an interview or coming to a focus group. You give them a small travel allowance or something. So yeah, so I suppose that's we need to think about how we can compensate participation. And then the other thing is virtual participation and bringing people together. Focus groups won't be the same. You have to actually can't just have a loose discussion on Zoom. It doesn't really work. So you'll need to have a much more structured kind of workshop. So it's participation and the digital divide, I think, for me, are the two biggest challenges.
I mean, that's a very interesting point, because we've been talking about a couple of evaluations at OTT, and the questions from the clients have focused on diversity and inclusion, and this is a big thing, right? If as Simon says, not everybody has the time to engage in evaluation processes, and we know that women have less time at home than men to engage in evaluation processes. People who have to care for their relatives have less time, etc. And the same thing in your case, Dena, where some people just do not have access to the tools that we as evaluators may prefer to use. And so if we don't take that into account, we're going to exclude a very important part of our audiences and those that we need to be informed by from the conversation and from the evaluation process. And certainly the evaluation will not bring their voices to the fore. So you mentioned something about video. So if I understand, you are providing them with more information up front, so that when it comes to the time when you engage with them, they are much better informed about what's being done, about the evaluation, about the work you've been doing, etc. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so it's linked to the fact that this evaluation is a strategic level evaluation across the whole organization. So it's not like we have a program team that is there and engaged. It covers really wide remit. So our immediate client, the evaluation team at IDRC, they're called the Policy and Evaluation Division. They convened an advisory group for us of people across the organization, people at director level, people at program officer level, program managers. So you get a cross section of people. And it's that group that we've been discussing and refining the methodology with. And so we're at the point now where we're trying to finalize the case study methodology, defining what the case studies are, and which programs are going to be fitting under each case study. It's quite a sort of complex structure to try and present and get their feedback on. So we decided, rather than just send them a report, as Dena said, rather than try and convene another Zoom meeting, that we would prepare our material in a PowerPoint and talk through that verbally and record ourselves, much like this. this kind of setting.
So it can be asynchronous engagement, you know.
Asynchronous, yes, that's the key thing, so that they can then watch and engage and respond in their own time. You know, whether that's at 10 o'clock at night because of their kind of schedule that they're working on now. It means that there's more flexibility, and we're more likely to get people who are just, you know, not as available in this time as they would be.
Right, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you. So let's move on to the more positive sides. We're already thinking about some new ways of doing things and getting things done. Are there any silver linings that have emerged out of this redesign or having to respond to this crisis?
For me, I think it's been really exciting upskilling and learning new skills and learning how to do virtual participation. We've dabbled in it in the past, but we didn't really have to take it that seriously. And now, you know, we've retooled, we've upskilled, we're all experimenting with new methodologies. We ran a theory of change planning evaluation workshop online for the first time. You know, using tools like collaborative tools like Mural, and yeah, it really works. And we're able to, I think, continue to take, you know, that kind of virtual collaboration forward into the future. So that's been the silver lining.
Yeah, you jumped on quickly with running online workshops training in your organization. That was pretty smart, I think.
I know, yes, I've seen that. I'll join in when you get more information out there, Dena.
I'm going to send it to you later.
But there's certainly not been a shortage of sort of guidance and tips on running online meetings and workshops, which has been really useful. So yeah, I've run a few online workshops now, and it's it certainly is a revelation, really, because I mean, we've run online meetings before, we've done webinars, but trying to do a whole workshop online is really the first time. So like Dena, it's kind of, it's been good to teach yourself and to learn from others those new skills. But it's not as easy as it sounds either. You know, there's plenty of tools out there. There's tons of stuff that you can use, but there's a skill in really thinking through which tools you need and how to use them best, and also how to introduce them. You know, we did a session with Mural, and we spent half the session just talking to people about how to use Mural. Yeah, because some people it just doesn't come naturally, and we thought that was worth the investment because it's a tool that we will continue to use with that group. But if it's just a one-off session, the tool can actually get in the way of what you're trying to do. So you really need to think about whether it's worthwhile introducing it in the first place.
So that's the other part of the digital divide, is that not everyone's a digital native. So that's one also has to consider. But there are ways getting around that. But yeah, I think the other value though is exposing, you know, the people you're working with to those tools. So they get, wow, I mean, we did a workshop the other day with a person, we said, what inspired you about today? And he said, playing with the mural before the session. So, you know, we share the link ahead of time, we give them an exercise to try and complete, so that by the time as people are logging in to the session, we say, please visit the mural and just say, what made you smile yesterday? Or, you know, what made you happy on the weekend? Or what can you see out your window? So they're playing with it as people are kind of checking in. And you know, and I think that's also value, is transferring those, exposing people to what's possible through those sessions.
Yeah, the evaluators become your friends in a way in their own upskilling, because they are dealing with some of these same issues, but for other purposes. So in terms of lessons, recommendations for evaluators working under these conditions. I mean, clearly one that is coming out of this recent bit of the conversation, you know, don't overdo it with technology, right? Don't just throw tech at people. Think it through, right? Think what's necessary, what's the most appropriate for your purpose, the objective of the session or the evaluation. As you say, Simon, if it's a one-off event, if it's a small evaluation, Zoom might be okay. If it's going to be a long-term engagement, then it might be worth investing in learning a common technology, common platform to work on. Take into account the constraints that people are under, the challenges that people are facing in their personal and professional life. I think that's another key lesson that you've identified. But what else? Are there any bits of advice that you might offer fellow evaluators about working in this context?
Do you want to go ahead, Simon?
Sure. I mean, I think a couple of things, I guess, related to the challenge I talked about earlier, the fact that everyone's so busy and everything's taking longer. You really need to replan, like quite frequently. Whatever you think might be possible right now, it's going to change next week or the week after. So, I mean, that kind of level of flexibility is needed right now. Also, just agreeing communications with people, with the different people that you're expecting to work with. Just have a frank conversation about what's reasonable for them, like how often, what kind of interaction, email, Zoom, Slack, trying to agree some common standards around how you're going to interact in this time. And then just online workshops will always take longer to plan than you think. So I'm sort of advising people now, a standard workshop might have taken sort of 1 or 2 days to plan per day of your workshop. An online workshop would take sort of 3 or 4 hours per hour of workshop.
Yeah, makes sense. Dena?
So yeah, you mentioned 2 of the really important things. Just remember diversity, so people's circumstances, digital skills, access, all of those things are really important. Gender dimension of evaluation, of participation. Brush up on your online virtual facilitation skills, particularly if you want to do participatory evaluation or you want to run focus groups or workshops online as part of your data gathering. And something we didn't talk about, which is recording interviews. So find a good technology to be able to record the interview that you're doing online. So if you're doing it WhatsApp, how are you going to record it? If you're using Skype, how are you going to record it? So those are the key things. And rework your budgets. If you had a lot of travel budget, for example, you're not using that now, but you've got other expenses like data costs that you might want to share out to participants. So that's another thing. And then in terms of keeping the relationship going with clients, as Simon said, work out how they want to engage, but also I think kind of more frequency of engagement. So we have a regular Thursday check-in with IDRC, and that's really useful. It keeps us, keeps the ball rolling, it keeps everyone engaged, and it keeps the relationship going.
Great. And so any lessons you're going to take from this experience and that you think will be relevant in the future when we don't have to do everything virtually, but we might want to? What are you going to take with you from this experience? I mean, I know this is still early days, unfortunately, but what have you learned so far that you think has been a revelation and you'll want to continue doing in the future?
So for me, I mean, one of the things that we've been able to do, we've actually had planned it offline already before, and we're actually doing it for IDRC as well, but this is something we're doing for the Activate evaluation for the DG Murray Trust, is they asked us to build in more frequent sense-making sessions. So rather than just presenting the data all the way at the end, every time we get a data set, we chunked up our data collection so that we could walk along the process with the client. And, people for that were flying down from Johannesburg, or, the costs were quite high. Now we can present that data online, we can engage virtually. And if you're doing an international evaluation, you don't have to wait to the end to present your data. So you just use your online skills, bring your teams together, and you can keep people engaged in the evaluation as you go along and do sense making as a continuous process. It's obviously, nice to do it face to face and maybe even more dynamic. but it's possible. And I think it's rather than not to have it at all because of the expense or the carbon footprint of doing that kind of thing, it would be nice to continue to do that.
Yeah, I think for me, it's being grateful for those face-to-face interactions that you do get. No, I think now, hopefully by the end of this evaluation, we'll have another chance to go back to IDRC, maybe to do this kind of sense-making process or to present the final thing. But I feel like that's going to be a really nice opportunity, and I'm going to make sure we make the most of it. And for the next evaluation I do, I'm going to really make sure I get the most out of the kind of initial inception meetings as well. Because I guess it's easy to take that for granted. And just knowing now that it's possible to do more online than you used to, I think it will mean that future evaluation designs will look a bit different. And people are also, other people are more comfortable with online interaction now. I think it might be a bit of a sort of a bounce, once people start traveling again, that people are going to be sick of their online meetings and be like, no, not doing that. But I think that it'll settle back to a state where we will be doing more online than travel now.
I think another thing is using, local field workers more, local evaluators more. So trusting, you don't have to be there yourself. You can work with people who are located and who can go to the places, the deep rural areas, for example, on their own and collect data. So we do that a lot, but we tend to pair up, a senior from the core evaluation team with someone and travel together which is lovely. But if you can't do that, just continue to use local evaluators, and it's a great way for everyone to continue working together.
Thank you very much for joining me today in this conversation, and I hope we can continue engaging on this issue as we learn about doing evaluations remotely throughout the year, which I'm sure it's going to be the case.